Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're putting on our thinking caps, maybe even some safety goggles, because we're about to examine a blueprint. It's for a world that promises perfection, but, and this is the catch, only if you're willing to give up pretty much everything that makes you, well, you. Human. We are diving into B.F. Skinner's really controversial 1948 novel, Walden Two. And just to be clear, our mission here isn't just to read this as, some old piece of utopian fiction. No, we're actually treating it like a design document, a blueprint for total, maybe even pervasive behavioral control. And we want to trace its lineage because it's got a very clear line right up to the modern day, specifically into practices like applied behavior analysis, you probably know it as ABA, and the way it frames language, which Skinner called verbal behavior. The reason this book sticks with you, I think, is that it's a story that somehow manages to smile while it's putting you in a cage. It offers order, guaranteed serenity, even radical efficiency. But the price, it's steep. It's the elimination of unpredictable thought, dissent, your whole interior life, really. You think about Fahrenheit 451 warning us about the state, burning books to control thought. Mm-hmm.
Walden Two feels, I don't know, maybe scarier.
Yeah.
Because the citizens just stop needing the books. Curiosity itself has been conditioned right out of them, replaced by this perfect, soothing programming.
That's exactly it. And what's so fascinating, and maybe a little unsettling, is that to really understand the mechanisms we see operating today, things like token economies, those very tight reinforcement schedules, even the whole idea of language being just a transaction, you absolutely have to go back and grasp the foundational vision of the architect, Skinner. He wasn't just, sketching out a commune. He thought he was solving the human riddle itself. He designed a world where control is so deeply woven into the fabric of the environment, so seamless, that it actually feels like care, for all intents and purposes. And that tension right there, that's the core of our deep dive today. The question the text really forces you, the listener, to confront is, what actually happens to humanity when that beautiful, messy, unpredictable chaos of freedom gets completely swapped out for the dream of perfect efficiency? Okay, let's unpack that. Let's start with maybe the most radical piece, Skinner's actual view of human nature, because that's the bedrock for his whole design, isn't it?
Absolutely fundamental.
And he didn't pull any punches. He pretty bluntly viewed consciousness as basically an illusion, freedom, just a superstition, and dignity, get this, an obstacle to progress.
He really did. It's stark when you read it. He felt he had to sideline the internal life, the subjective experience, to make his system actually work on a practical level.
Right, so his real target wasn't necessarily bad behavior in the moral sense.
Oh, not primarily. His target was what he called variability, that unruly, kind of random, unpredictable pulse of human life, our feelings, the meanings we make, all that internal stuff. He looked at that vast, subjective inner world that we all experience, and he basically saw noise, interference, something that just got in the way of a smooth, perfectly operating, predictable society. He genuinely seemed to believe he needed to fix us because we were just too troubled by unmeasured meaning, by feelings that couldn't be easily quantified or controlled.
Okay, but hang on. For most people listening, when you talk about eliminating freedom and variability, that sounds like tyranny, like dictatorship. How does Skinner propose doing that without, the obvious tools, without guns or prisons?
And that's the crucial innovation in his blueprint. That's the genius, or maybe the terrifying part, depending on your view. His solution is in force. It's the quiet architecture of contingencies, scheduled reinforcement. If you're not familiar with the term, just think of a contingency as the often invisible system of incentives and consequences that shapes almost every tiny decision you make every day.
Like cause and effect, but managed.
Exactly, but meticulously managed. Skinner believed you didn't need brute force. You just needed to redesign the environment so perfectly, so subtly, that only the behaviors the system wants are rewarded consistently. And the undesirable ones, they're just starved of reinforcement. They wither away without a fight. Change the contingencies, he argued, and you change the person. Seamlessly. Almost without them noticing.
Wow. So the famous harmony that you read about in the Walden Two community, it's not built on people understanding each other or shared values or empathy.
Not really, no.
It's built on that precise, almost gentle environmental control. They even boast about it, don't they? No punishments, only contingencies.
That's their mantra. And this is the great sleight of hand, isn't it? The control is perfected precisely when it stops looking like control. Because the system is so pervasive, so effective at meeting basic needs and guiding behavior, the absence of a visible authority figure, no police, no overt rules, becomes, ironically, the ultimate authority, The environment is the authority.
Can the people?
Well, the citizens are described as perpetually docile, often smiling, content. But the implication is that this docility, these smiles, they aren't spontaneous joy. They're conditioned reflexes, byproducts of a system that relentlessly rewards conformity and pleasantness.
It seems horrifyingly neat, tidy, too tidy. I think one of the most striking comments on this, it comes from the historical sources themselves, right? You mentioned letters.
Yes, exactly. We have these letters from scholars going back to 1972, not long after the book had time to sink in, and they were already calling the whole system a meticulously managed human zoo.
A human zoo. Wow.
That phrase just cuts right to the heart of it, doesn't it? It captures that chilling realization that in Walden Two, order completely replaces understanding. The system ensures every need is met, every impulse is gently guided, yes, but it achieves this by essentially outsourcing individual responsibility, judgment, struggle, all of it.
Yeah.
Entirely to the environment's design. The inhabitants become perfectly cared for specimens in this zoo, maybe happy in a limited way, but arguably not autonomous human agents anymore.
Okay, so moving beyond just the structure, the physical setup, let's
Yeah.
dig into the underlying philosophy, the ethos. Because Skinner wasn't just proposing a scientific setup, he was basically engineering a whole new theology, wasn't he? But one built around efficiency.
That's a great way to put it. A theology of efficiency. Every concept we normally associate with morality, good, bad, right, wrong, gets completely repurposed, re-engineered purely for management within this system.
So in this, let's call it the gospel of efficiency. What's the ultimate sin?
Sin. Oh, that's easy. Sin is inefficiency, waste, unpredictability, and salvation. How do you achieve grace in Walden Two?
Compliance.
Simple, complete compliance. Your moral worth isn't judged by your conscience or your intentions or the meaning you find in your life or any internal struggle. Nope. It's measured entirely by the stability you contribute to the community, by the measurable outcome of your behavior.
And Fraser, the founder character, he basically says this outright, doesn't he? Something like,
He boasts. He says, "We have solved the problems of government and economics by making them unnecessary. Just design them out of the system through behavioral engineering."
the core belief seems to be that the perfection of control must always masquerade as the absence of control. That's the ideal state.
Precisely. You can only live well in this view when you surrender that messy, unpredictable interior life. The source material we looked at calls noise.
If it can't be measured, it can't be managed.
And therefore, it's almost considered unreal, or at least problematic. Something that needs to be conditioned out for the sake of stability and order.
Okay, so if that's the theology, what's the economy running on?
Well, if efficiency is the god, then the economy of control is the currency it uses. Walden Two basically runs on what you could call a closed behavioral currency. Think about fundamental human activities: work, love, learning, even rest. In this system, they become just entries in a ledger of control.
So stability isn't built on things like trust between people.
Not primarily. It's achieved through the continuous, carefully measured circulation of behavioral reward. Positive reinforcement keeps the system stable, not human connection or mutual understanding.
Right, and this is where, as you mentioned earlier, the critique really hits home for today. The source material draws this incredibly direct line between this theoretical behavioral economy in the book and aspects of modern life.
Yes, it's quite striking. Think about this paraphrase because it really crystallizes the whole philosophy. You know Marx's famous line, "From each according to his ability to each according to his need." Skinner never formally wrote this down. But the system he designed, the one operating in Walden Two, essentially runs on a silent, implicit contract. From each according to reinforcement history to each according to compliance.
Wow, okay, let me process that. From each according to reinforcement history. So what you've learned to do based on rewards.
Exactly. What behaviors the system has successfully shaped in you.
2, according to compliance. Meaning you get benefits based on how well you follow the program.
Precisely. Your value, the resources you access, they're entirely tied to your measured adherence to the system's goals, your measurable output, not based on some idea of innate need or fundamental human worth outside that system.
And the parallel being drawn is,
The parallel is that every single token board in a classroom, every sticker chart for chores, every point system used in, say, certain clinical settings or even corporate wellness programs, they are, in a way, miniature Walden Twos.
little closed economies of behavior.
Exactly. They replicate that same closed, managed logic. The child or the employee or the patient can become viewed primarily as a site of production, a place where feelings or needs are converted into measurable output. And compliance, doing the expected thing, becomes the most highly valued product. It's the Kamian logic, just scaled down to the individual level.
Okay, so this architecture of control, it shapes behavior, it shapes the economy. It must inevitably shape language too, right? How people talk.
Oh, absolutely. It extends directly into language itself. And you see this in the novel. The source points out that in the commune, people talk constantly, but no one ever truly speaks.
What does that mean, truly speaks?
It means their discussion feels, well, domesticated is the word used, tamed. They exchange words, yes. Information is conveyed. But often sounds less like genuine, messy, exploratory conversation and more like a precise calibration of the environment.
Yeah.
Or confirming shared conditioning. It's syntax without soul, maybe.
And this functional, almost sterile quality of the dialogue in the novel, you're saying that's a direct precursor to his later nonfiction work.
Yes, directly to verbal behavior. That's his technical analysis of language. And in that model, language gets stripped right down to what he called his operant skeleton. It's reduced to only observable, measurable transactions, things he categorized as mands, which are basically requests or commands.
Give me water.
Right. Then tax, which are labels.
That is water.
Echoics, which are just repetitions.
You say water, I say water.
And intraverbals, which are like conversational fill-ins, answering questions, completing standard phrases.
Twinkle little star.
Exactly. Those are the building blocks, all observable, all measurable.
So in this view, speech is fundamentally just a tool, a mechanism to get a desired consequence from the environment, like pushing a lever to get a food pellet.
That's the functional view, yes. It confirms your conditioning is working. It gets you what you need within the system. But it doesn't really allow for or even acknowledge the discovery of deeper meaning or the unfolding of an interior self through language. That's just not part of the model.
Which is the core critique, isn't it? The chilling thing is how both the stilted dialogues in the fictional Walden Two and the technical diagrams in the nonfiction Verbal Behaviour basically operate on the same assumption. Language is just a series of mechanical transactions.
Efficient, functional, transparent. That's the goal.
Yeah.
But the problem, the deep problem, is that human conversation, real connection, it's fundamentally relational. It's not just transactional. Skinner's model kind of misses the music for the notes.
So, okay, if that's the critique, what does the source material offer as a counter-perspective? How do we bring humanity back into the picture of language?
Well, the source introduces a contrasting framework. Gestalt language processing, or GLP, which isn't the main topic today, but it serves as a useful foil here.
Yeah, so.
Because GLP helps define exactly what Skinner's model erases. It suggests that meaning often comes first, that language doesn't always arise from tiny, discrete parts being pieced together, but emerges more holistically, gesturally, musically, often driven by deep feeling or experience, especially in early language development.
And this is where that anecdote comes in, right? The one you mentioned from the sources.
Yes, this is where the humanity just rushes back in, I think. The contrast becomes so incredibly clear with that brilliant, relatable story, the one about the person being lost and anxious in a foreign city, totally overwhelmed. And in this moment of panic, what do? They start humming. Specifically that Gene Wilder song from Willy Wonka. There's no earthly way of knowing in which direction we are going.
Right, just this fragment of melody and lyric humming it under their breath.
Now, if you apply a strict Skinnerian verbal behavior lens to that, what is that humming? It doesn't seem to serve an immediate function. It's not a mand or a tact. It might be dismissed as, I don't know, echolalia maybe, or just non-functional vocal stereotypy. Noise that should probably be extinguished in favor of more functional language.
Yeah, it doesn't do anything in that framework.
Exactly. But in the source materials analysis, drawing on that feeling-based perspective, that humming, that noise, is described as utterly selfific.
Selfific.
As remembering the self through sound. Using melody and intonation, a stored gestalt, to bridge a moment of terror with a past feeling of maybe wonder or tenderness associated with the song. It's language as self-regulation, as connection to feeling, not just transaction.
Wow, that's a powerful contrast.
It really is. Skinner wanted a language that was purely efficient, functional, transparent, easily measurable. But the side effect, the source argues, is the death of relational communication. The death of conversation as a way of truly meeting another person, or even oneself. And that's why the prose itself in Walden Two, the way people talk, feels so stilted, so flattened. The very tone of the book betrays the emotional repression that's required to keep that perfectly ordered system running.
Okay, so let's zoom out again. Look at the bigger picture, the historical context. Because Walden Two, published in 1948, wasn't just some isolated thought experiment, was it?
Not at all. The source positions it as a node in a larger machinery. It really reflected and maybe contributed to the post-war boom in industrial psychology and Cold War behavioral governance. There was this huge focus across society on making populations predictable, manageable.
So it was part of a larger trend.
A significant shift, yeah. The idea that the state's control, which maybe used to feel more external, like laws and police, was becoming internalized. Surveillance was slowly morphing into self-regulation, guided by these psychological principles. And the source highlights a truly dark lineage here, which is uncomfortable but important. It argues that the underlying ideology of eugenics hadn't actually disappeared after World War II. It had just rebranded.
Rebranded how?
What was once framed crudely as racial hygiene started getting couched in the language of human improvement, optimizing potential, scientific management of populations, using behavioral science.
But the goal remains similar.
The underlying moral project, the source argues, remained disturbingly similar: to make people predictable, to filter out the noise, the undesirable variations, for the sake of a smoothly functioning, efficient society.
And that phrase you used earlier, scientific humanitarianism?
Yes, that logic, the idea of wedding compassion or care with tight control, that's seen as the thread connecting Skinner's vision directly to a lot of early behavioral research, particularly in areas like autism and even some modern compliance-focused practices. The stated goal is often help or improvement, but the primary mechanism is achieving normalization or compliance.
And the core critique remains.
The core critique, right through this lineage, is that this entire system of thought prefers to extinguish a behavior, to manage it away, rather than to ever truly encounter or wrestle with its underlying meaning. What is this behavior communicating? That question gets sidelined. Control comes first. Understanding, if it comes at all, is a distant second.
And, if you listen closely today, you really can hear echoes, fragments of the Walden Two Catechism in the language of modern bureaucracy, can't you?
Oh, absolutely.
Think about phrases like freedom from error as a goal, or setting behavioral objectives, or the constant drive for data-driven improvement.
Performance metrics, KPIs.
Right. These aren't necessarily bad things in themselves, but the source suggests they are direct descendants of Fraser's monologues in Walden Two. They reflect a worldview where the virtue of a system or even the success of a person is measured primarily in compliance points and hitting the metrics. It's the same logic. Enforce serenity through measurement and control.
And the ultimate goal, the essential aim of the Walden Two blueprint, when you boil it all down, was to achieve this perfect stillness, this perfect silence, by eliminating all opposition, all variation, all that messy human noise. So the critical insight, the thing we need to hold on to if we want to resist that blueprint, is that noise is not disorder. It isn't just chaos to be eliminated.
What is it then?
It is the texture of life before categorization. It's the sound of complexity, of feeling, of meaning that hasn't yet been neatly packaged and measured. It's the sound of aliveness itself.
Wow. Okay, this has been, a really deep dive. We've essentially read Skinner's book, not just as literature, but more like a confession, maybe, or a technical manual, exposing this blueprint for what the source calls benevolent control. And the unsettling part is seeing how visible that blueprint still is.
Right.
Operating in corners of our modern world, from certain clinical settings maybe to aspects of education to corporate culture.
It really makes you think. And if they haven't described in Walden Two is this state of total, measured, predictable order. And its architects genuinely sought to extinguish that hum, that unmeasured, unpredictable, resonant human noise. Then maybe the final takeaway question for you, the listener, building on all this is, what does it mean for you in your own life to consciously choose aliveness, to consciously choose to let that beautiful, sometimes difficult, resistant human noise persist?
A powerful question to end on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the architecture of control. We'll talk to you next time.